How does a quiet, tired-looking father, sent out of his daughter's house with only a grocery bag, become the person who decides if she keeps that house at all? What happens when the man everyone calls a burden turns out to own the buildings and money behind their lifestyle? Can a single dinner where a daughter says her dad is in the way start the fall of everything she thinks she controls? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Michael Reed, but most people just call me Mike. When I tell this story, people imagine a big scene with shouting and plates flying. It was not like that. The strange thing is how normal the evening looked at first. The table was set perfectly, with matching plates and tall glasses. There were candles that smelled like citrus and herbs. My daughter Sophie loves that kind of thing. She says a table should look good in photos. I sat at the far end, half in the light and half in the shadow, next to my grandson Eli. Sophie sat in the center, across from her husband Daniel. On her left sat my ex-wife Linda, and on her right sat Linda's husband Graham. It was his idea to have this family dinner before Eli's birthday. That was how Sophie had explained it to me. She said they wanted to talk about plans and make sure everyone was on the same page. I thought she meant the party and school and little things. I did not understand that the plans were actually about me. They all looked comfortable in that room. Sophie wore a soft sweater and her hair was tied in a neat knot. Graham had on a pressed shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Linda had a new bracelet that clicked quietly every time she moved her hand. Daniel poured a little wine into everyone's glass except mine. He did not do this to be cruel. He said the last time that he thought I preferred water, and I had nodded. Sometimes a tiny habit like that becomes a rule in a family. I had my usual glass of water by my plate. At first, the talk was light. They discussed Eli's teachers, some office story from Sophie's work, and a new client Graham had signed. I listened and nodded. I am not a great talker, and I never pretended to be one. I mostly watch. I notice how people look at each other, when they smile from their eyes, and when it is only with their lips. I noticed that night that every time money or plans came up, someone's eyes slid in my direction and then away again. The turn in the conversation came slowly, like a car easing off a main road onto a smaller one. Sophie said it had been a busy month, that the mortgage and all the rising costs were a lot to handle. Graham added that things were tight everywhere and that it was important to be smart about household structure. He used those words like he was in a meeting at his firm. Then Sophie mentioned that it was hard to manage everything with another adult in the house who was not really contributing as much as he could. I knew she meant me, of course. She did not look at me when she said it. She looked at her plate, pushing pieces of chicken around with her fork. Linda stared at her napkin. Daniel shifted in his chair and took a sip of wine. Eli did not notice any of this. He was busy trying to balance a carrot on the edge of his plate. Sophie went on. She said she felt pressure when her friends asked why her father lived with them. She said some of them made comments about grown parents who never move on. She said she was tired of explaining that I had health problems and that my old job was gone. Then she said she felt like she was carrying me. That was the first time that evening when she actually lifted her eyes and looked at me. Graham spoke next. He said it was not healthy for a young family to take on what he called a long-term support role for a parent. He said it was understandable in an emergency, but that emergencies are supposed to end. He said he respected my past work, but that at some point everyone has to face reality. He looked at me like a manager closing a file. The message was clear. In their eyes, I was the file. I told them I understood that things were tight. I said I tried to help where I could, that I watched Eli fix things around the house and paid for some groceries. Sophie replied that this was not enough. She said I did not pay rent at all, that I did not pay for utilities, and that she felt her life was on hold because she had to think about me in every decision. She reminded me that I had turned down her suggestion to sell my little properties and put the money into her house. She made it sound foolish. Then she said the thing that stayed in my ears long after that night. She said she felt like I was a burden. Not in a heated voice, not shouted across the table. She said it slowly, like she had practiced it in her head many times. She added that she could not keep living like that, and that for her own peace she needed me to move out. She followed with the words that it had to be tonight, because she could not keep putting it off. For a moment, the room felt very small. The candles flickered, and I could hear the soft buzz of the fridge in the kitchen. No one else spoke. I looked at Linda, she looked down, I looked at Graham. He held his fork in midair, watching me over it. Daniel stared at his plate. Eli finally sensed that something serious was happening and asked why everyone had gone so quiet. No one answered him. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask how my own daughter could say such a thing. I simply asked if this was what she truly wanted. She said yes. She said she had thought about it for a long time and that this was better for everyone. She added that she did not want to end up resenting me even more. That last part was like a gentle kick to the chest, but I stayed still. I told her I would be out that night, if that would help her. I did not ask where I was supposed to go. I already knew that I had options she could not see, and that knowledge sat quietly in the back of my mind like a folded note. At that same time, I also felt something else, a kind of heavy sadness that is not loud but deep. I had moved in with them thinking I was still useful. In her eyes, I was a weight she needed to drop. I stood up slowly and thanked them for the meal. That detail might sound strange, but my parents raised me to always thank the cook. Sophie nodded, not meeting my eyes. Linda muttered that she hoped we could talk more later. Graham said he hoped I would understand with time. Eli grabbed my sleeve and asked if I could still come to his birthday party. I told him I would try. In the guest room, I did not have much to pack. I had never brought my real life into that house. Only the surface. A few shirts, some work pants, basic things. I put them in a big grocery bag that once held flour and sugar. I also took a small metal box from the top shelf of the closet. Sophie probably thought it held old photos or letters. In a way, she was right. It held my past, but in a different form. Papers, keys, and a simple pen. I slipped it into the bag. When I came back to the hallway, they were still at the table. The plates had been pushed aside. No one was eating anymore. Sophie walked me to the door. She put a small envelope into my hand and said it was just some cash to help me get by for a bit. She said we would figure out the rest later. The words sounded like something she had heard in a meeting and decided to reuse at home. On the front step, the air was cool. The sky was already dark, except for a thin line of color near the horizon. I could see their neighbor across the street pretending to adjust something in his yard while he watched me. People notice when someone leaves a house with only a grocery bag in his hand. I did not give him a show. I lifted my bag, nodded to him, and started walking. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. I walked slowly, not because I was weak, but because I needed a little time to let my thoughts settle. Each step felt like it moved me out of one life and back toward another. The houses in that area all looked similar: neat lawns, trimmed hedges, cars that shone under streetlights. I had helped wire some of those homes years earlier, back when my work shirt had my name stitched on it and people called me in to fix things. None of those people knew whose name was on certain property papers now. That was fine. I never needed them to know. At the bus stop, I sat on the cold metal bench and set my grocery bag between my feet. The street was quiet. A light flickered above me. In the distance, I could hear the engine of the bus as it made its way through the route. I pulled my phone out of my pocket more out of habit than need. There was a message from Sophie, sent just after I left. She wrote that she hoped I would not make this harder than it needs to be, and that she wanted to move forward without guilt. I read it twice and then locked the screen. As I sat there, my phone vibrated again. This time, it was not a message. The screen lit up with an incoming call from a number saved under the simple name Workshop Line. That is what we call the main phone at the community tool library on the other side of town. I stared at the name for a second, feeling the two sides of my life tilt toward each other. Then I pressed accept and lifted the phone to my ear. While the bus headlights grew brighter down the road, on the other end of the line I heard Rosa's voice. She sounded worried. She said she had tried calling me earlier and wanted to check that I was all right. I told her I was fine, just out later than usual. She asked if I would still be coming to chair the board meeting in the morning, because some of the volunteers had questions about the new tool lending rules. I said I would be there. My voice stayed steady as I said it, but my hand was tight around the phone. As I ended the call, the bus pulled up with a soft hiss of brakes. The doors opened and the driver gave me a quick look, the kind of look people give an older man carrying a grocery bag at night. I tapped my card, took a seat near the middle, and set the bag on my lap. The lights inside were bright and made everything look flat and pale. Outside, the houses of Sophie's neighborhood slid by, then the small shops, then the darker spaces between. I looked at my reflection in the window, an aging man with tired eyes, in an old jacket, holding a bag that rustled when the bus turned. That was one part of me. The other part, the one connected to the small metal box in the bag and to the name on certain doors in the city, did not show in the glass. I thought about how easy it is for people to forget what they cannot see in front of them every day. Sophie saw an old maintenance worker with bad knees, not a person who had once held a whole factory's problems in his hands. The ride to my side of town takes about 40 minutes. Plenty of time to think, or to try not to. That night my mind slipped backwards, as if the seats themselves were made of old memories. I saw the break room at the factory where I spent most of my working life. Orange plastic chairs, a table with scratches, a machine that made weak coffee. My name, Mike, in blue letters sewn onto my shirt. People from the floor coming in and out, calling my name when something broke. I remembered the smell of machine oil and warm metal. I remembered how many times I stayed late when someone asked if I could just take a quick look at a line that had gone down. I said yes more often than not, because I knew that if the line stopped, people would lose hours and pay. I walked the length of that place more times than I could count, listening for odd sounds, feeling for vibration changes through my boots. The managers came and went. The workers changed. I stayed. Back then, Sophie was still small. I kept a photo of her in my locker. She had missing front teeth in that picture and was holding a bright balloon from a school fair. Sometimes, when I took a short break, I would open the locker, touch the edge of the photo, and remind myself what all the hours were for. I wanted her to have choices I did not have. I wanted her to go to a better school, wear shoes that were not on sale because they were out of season, eat food that was not just what I could get cheapest. When the factory changed owners, things became harder. They cut staff, pushed old machines harder, stretched safety rules. One day, a line went down, and a supervisor pressed me to fix it in a hurry. I did what I could, but some parts were not safe. I said this. He said they needed it running. In the end, there was an accident. Not the worst kind, but bad enough that I was out of work for a long time and then never really came back the same way. There was a settlement. It was not huge, but it was more money than I had ever seen at one time. That was when Harold came into the picture. A friend from the union told me to talk to him so I would not waste the money. Harold sat with me in his small office with files stacked along one wall. He asked about Sophie, about my health, about what I wanted later in life. I told him I wanted to make sure my daughter was safe if something happened to me. He suggested a trust and a small company to hold any property I might buy. I did not understand all the terms, but I understood the base idea. Put things in a structure that would keep them safe and set clear rules. We used part of the settlement and my savings to buy a small, old building in the industrial district, not far from where my loft is now. It was in bad shape, but the price was low. Harold helped me with the papers. I did some of the repairs myself. Over the years, we repeated the process with a few more buildings when chances came up. Each time, my name went on the papers, and the company we formed became a little stronger. Sophie knew I had some little rentals, but she never asked for details. I did not push the subject. On the bus, as the city center gave way to older streets with worn signs, I thought of the first time I saw Sophie in a hospital gown, holding Eli. That day is tied in my mind to the first time I felt truly pushed to the side by Graham. In the waiting area, the seats were full of relatives from his side and from Linda's side. I sat against the wall, holding a simple bouquet from a cheap flower stand and a small stuffed animal I had bought on the way there. When the nurse came out to call family in, she asked who the grandfather was. People answered with Graham's name first. He stepped forward with a big grin and open arms. I did not argue. I stayed sitting for a few minutes more, then went in quietly when it was less crowded. In the room, I saw Graham holding Eli, everyone taking pictures, Linda arranging Sophie's hair. Someone handed the camera to Graham and told him to stand next to Sophie, so the parents could be in the frame. I ended up standing near the window, holding the bouquet. Later, when Sophie was a little stronger, I offered to help with anything they needed at home. She thanked me, but Graham spoke up and said they had it covered, that I should rest and look after myself. He said they did not want me to tire myself. It sounded polite. It also sounded like a closed door. I saw then that he liked to be the one in the center, the one that nurses and visitors turned to first. I let it go. I thought as long as Sophie was happy and the baby was healthy, I could stand at the edge of the photos. My stop came up, and the bus driver called out the street name. I stepped down onto the cracked sidewalk of my side of town. The air was different there, cooler and with a hint of metal and cooking oil from the small food stand on the corner. I walked past the closed tire shop with its faded sign and around the side to the metal stair that led up to my loft door. The steps creaked the way they always did, but the sound felt like a greeting rather than a warning. Inside, the loft was quiet and familiar. One big room with a small kitchen along one wall, a bed under the window, and shelves with tools, books, and boxes. It did not look like much, but it was mine. I set the grocery bag on the table and took off my jacket. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to the hum of the small fridge and the distant sound of a train. I opened the metal box and took out the papers. On top was a simple printed sheet listing the properties the company owned, the tool library building, a couple of old houses, the structure where Graham's firm rented office space, and a line with the address of Sophie's street. Next to each line was a note about rent and terms. I had seen this sheet many times before, but that night it felt different, like I was seeing my own life written in another language and finally starting to understand it. Under the list was a copy of the trust summary Harold had given me years ago. I did not read every word. I just let my eyes rest on certain phrases. There was a section about my daughter as the main person who would benefit. There was also a smaller section that mentioned conditions around care, contact, and respect, written in formal language that Harold had once explained to me in simple terms. I had agreed to it, never really thinking I would have to use it. I put the papers back in the box and closed it. I did not feel ready to make any choice that night. The emotions from dinner were still too fresh. Instead, I lay down on the bed for an hour, staring at the ceiling and listening to the traffic far away. I thought about the first time Sophie rode a bike without training wheels, me running behind her with one hand on the seat. I thought about the nights I came home from the factory so tired I could barely lift my feet, but still read her a story. Those pictures did not fit with the words she had used for me at the table. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. Light slipped in around the curtain. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was, then remembered the bus, the envelope in my pocket, and the grocery bag still on the table. I washed, put on clean clothes, and made simple breakfast. Then I picked up the metal box again and placed it carefully into my old leather shoulder bag. It felt heavier than it really was. The walk to the tool library takes about 10 minutes. I like that walk. I pass small garages, a shop that sells parts, a tiny park with 2 benches. That morning, the sky was clear and the air cool enough to wake me up fully. As I got closer, I heard the faint sound of someone moving tools around. The community tool library sits in an old warehouse that once stored parts for machines. The walls are thick brick, and the big doors still have marks from decades of use. Rosa and I worked hard to turn it into what it is now. We put in shelves from old factories, painted the walls, and set up a system for people to borrow tools and learn how to use them. The building belongs to my company, but in my mind, it belongs to everyone who walks through those doors with a broken item and leaves with something working. When I stepped inside, the smell of metal, wood, and coffee wrapped around me. A couple of volunteers were already sorting hammers and screwdrivers onto the racks. They greeted me with easy smiles. One of them said that Rosa had been asking when I would get there. I nodded and walked toward the small office in the back, where a glass pane looked out over the shelves. Rosa stood there, hands on her hips, studying a clipboard. She turned when she heard my steps. Her face softened when she saw me. She asked how I was. I told her that the dinner did not go as planned. That was all I said at first. She frowned and said she had guessed something was wrong from my voice the night before. She asked if I wanted to talk about it now or after the meeting. I told her we could wait until after. There were things to do. As I sat down at the desk and opened the ledger for the day, I felt the weight of the box in my bag again. On the wall above the desk hung a framed photo from the opening day of the tool library. In it, Rosa and I stood side by side with a group of families. Kids held up small tool kits. There was dust on our clothes and bright smiles on the faces around us. Looking at that photo, I felt something inside settle. In one part of town, my daughter saw me as a burden. In this part of town, people saw me as something else entirely. I picked up a pen, ready to begin the day. What I did not yet know was that this small office and the legal work that had built it would soon become the center of decisions that would reach all the way back to Sophie's tidy dining room and the words she had chosen the night before. The board meeting that morning was like many others on the surface. We sat around the old table in the office at the back of the tool library. The chairs did not match. The window glass had a small crack at one corner. Rosa stood at the whiteboard and went through the list of topics. Volunteers gave short reports about lost tools, broken drills, and a new idea for weekend classes. I listened, asked questions, and made simple decisions the way I always did. We agreed on a new deposit rule for more expensive tools. We approved a small purchase of safety glasses. We planned a repair workshop for old bikes before spring. My voice sounded normal, calm, and measured. If someone had walked in and watched, they would have thought I was the same as any other week. Inside, I felt like I was walking on 2 floors at once. On one floor, I was the man who knew where every wrench and ladder was stored, who could tell from a noise whether a saw needed maintenance. On the other floor, I was the man who had been told the night before that he was a burden and that he should leave a house with only a grocery bag in his hand. After the meeting, people drifted back to the shelves and workbenches. Rosa closed the office door and sat across from me. She looked at me for a moment without saying anything. Then she said she wanted me to tell her what had really happened at Sophie's dinner. Her tone was gentle but firm, like someone asking to see under a bandage. So I told her. I did not add much color to the story. I explained how the talk had started with expenses, how Sophie had spoken about pressure and image, how she had said that living with her father made her feel stuck, and how she had finally said she saw me as a burden and needed me to move out that night. I told Rosa that I had packed a bag and left, and that I was back in my loft now. Rosa pressed her lips together and looked down at her hands. She said she could not understand how someone could say this to the person who had raised them. She said she knew Sophie was under pressure, but that did not excuse those words. She added that I had been helping at their house and with Eli, and that any fair person would see that. I shrugged. I said that maybe Sophie had been carrying thoughts like that for a long time, and that they had finally poured out. I said it hurt, but I did not want to turn it into a loud fight. I said I had always tried to give her space. Rosa shook her head and used a quiet word for what Sophie had done that I will not repeat here. Then she leaned forward and reminded me of something very simple. She said that I was not living in Sophie's house as some kind of stray relative with nowhere else to go. She said I had a place of my own. I owned the building we were sitting in, through the small company Harold had helped me set up. I owned other buildings too. I had chosen to stay with Sophie for a while for family reasons, not because I had no roof of my own. Then she asked if Sophie actually knew how much I still controlled. I said no, not really. She knew about a few rentals, but not the details. Rosa asked why I had never explained it to her. I told her I had never liked to talk about money. I said that whenever people know there is something bigger behind you, they start acting different, and I had wanted my daughter to see me as a person and not as a set of numbers. Rosa said that maybe my silence had gone too far. By hiding my position, I had made it easy for others to build a story in their own heads. In that story, I was an older man with health problems and a modest pension, staying in his daughter's home because he had no other choice. In that story, it made sense to call me a burden and to act like I should be grateful for every spare corner. She said that story was not true and that it was time I stopped living inside it. While we were talking, my phone buzzed inside my pocket. When I checked it, I saw several messages from Sophie. The timestamp showed that she had sent them while we were in the meeting. The words on the screen were carefully written, like a work email and a personal note mixed together. In the first message, she wrote that she and Graham had talked after dinner and agreed that the situation with me had to change in a more permanent way. She wrote that they believed the best step would be for me to sign some documents that Graham's lawyer would prepare so they could manage my remaining assets responsibly. She mentioned the small properties and any savings and said that in return, they would make sure I was looked after as long as I lived. In the second message, she wrote that I should not take this as punishment, but as a clear plan for everyone's good. She wrote that I should not make emotional choices and that Graham knew how to handle investments better than I ever could. She wrote that if I agreed to sign, we could avoid future confusion and conflict, and she could stop feeling pressure. In the last message, she wrote that she wanted a quick answer so she could coordinate with Graham's lawyer. She added a line saying that she hoped I would not be stubborn and that I would not let past pride keep me from doing what is obviously best. I showed the messages to Rosa. Her face darkened as she read. She said Graham was not even trying to hide what he wanted. She said he and Sophie were acting like I was a tired branch they could trim and place where they wanted. She pointed out that the man who already enjoyed acting as my replacement at family events now wanted to control the legal roots of my life as well. I read the messages again myself, slower this time. I felt a new kind of calm flow in. It was not the calm of acceptance. It was the calm that comes when you look at a machine and finally see which belt is pulling which wheel and where the tension really is. I wrote back to Sophie in a few lines. I said I had read her messages. I said I was not ready to sign anything and that I would speak first to my own lawyer, Harold. I said I would let her know once I had clarity. I kept my words simple and polite. Her reply came fast. She wrote that I was making things harder, that I was holding on to control because I liked keeping her uncertain, and that I was putting her in a bad position. She wrote that she had her own family to think about now. I did not answer that last message. I put the phone face down on the desk. Rosa watched me and asked what I was going to do. I told her I did not know yet, but that I was done pretending that I did not have options. I said that last night had crossed a line I did not know still existed. It had turned my quiet patience into something else. Rosa suggested we get some air. We walked together to the neighborhood cafe. The place was simple, with 4 tables and a counter where a young man made coffee. We ordered 2 cups and sat by the window. Outside, the street hummed with small activity. A delivery truck, someone walking a dog, a cyclist weaving between cars. Rosa said she had always known I was modest, but she had not realized how much I had hidden even from myself. She reminded me of the numbers we had looked at together when we planned the tool library budget. She said that if I wanted to, I could sell 1 building and never worry about rent for the rest of my life. Instead, I had chosen to keep rents low for good tenants, to support the tool library, and to help Sophie with a discount on her house. She said that my kindness had been turned into something she did not like to name. I told her I had thought I was doing the right thing. When you grow up without much, the instinct to give and not to talk about it feels like the right path. You think that if you are generous quietly, people will feel it and respond with care. I said that in many places, that had worked. The workers and families around the tool library did treat me with real respect. It was only in the part of my life that should have been safest, with my own child, that the story had twisted. Rosa asked if I trusted Harold. I said I did. He had been steady for years, never pushing, always explaining. She told me that the next step was clear then. I needed to talk to him, not to Graham's lawyer. I needed to open all the folders and look at what I had built and what rules were already written into it. After coffee, we parted ways at the corner. Rosa went back to the tool library. I walked in the other direction, toward a street lined with older brick buildings. 2 blocks down stood the structure where Graham's design and construction firm rented its main office. I had not gone by there in a while. That day, I felt a need to see it with fresh eyes. The building was not special at first glance. 4 floors, large windows, a glass door with the firm's name neatly printed on it. Workers and clients came and went. Through the glass, I could see a reception desk, a few chairs, a wall with framed images of finished projects. On one side hung a large photo of Graham in a safety vest and hard hat, shaking hands with someone on a site. He wore the smile he saved for cameras. I stood on the opposite sidewalk and watched for a moment. A group of people came out laughing, wearing neat clothes and carrying folders. Graham followed behind them, talking with his hands. He liked to move as if every space was a small stage. People turned toward him easily, drawn by his voice and energy. No one looked in my direction. That was fine. They did not see me, but my name was written in small print on the papers that allowed this place to exist as it did. As I stood there, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an email alert. I opened it and saw a message from Harold. The subject line was simple. It contained my last name and the word review. In the message, he wrote that he had received an inquiry from Graham's side about my overall estate structure. He wrote that before anything moved forward, he wanted to meet with me and go over the trust and company documents, as it had been some time since our last full review. He suggested a few times in the coming days and asked me to call his office to confirm. At the end, he added a short personal line. He wrote that if something had changed in my family situation, he wanted me to know that I still had more choices than it might seem at first. I read the email twice, then a third time. The noise of the street faded for a moment. It felt as if someone had quietly turned on a bright work light over a table in my mind. All the pieces I had been trying not to look at clearly were now visible. Sophie's messages, Graham's confidence, the old clauses Harold had once explained, the properties and the tool library, the word that had been used for me at the dinner table the night before. They were all on that table, waiting. I put the phone in my pocket and took one more look at Graham's office door with its shiny logo. Then I turned and started walking back toward my side of town, already forming the words I would say when I called Harold's office to accept the meeting. I called Harold's office from the sidewalk, with the building that held Graham's firm still in view behind me. His assistant answered, recognized my name, and put me through. Harold's voice came on, calm and steady as always. He asked how I was. I did not want to tell the whole story there on the street, so I just said that it had been a rough week and that I had seen his email. He said he had figured as much from the message he received from Graham's side. He did not go into detail on the phone. He said this kind of talk was better done face-to-face with the file in front of us. He offered me several times over the next few days. I chose the earliest morning slot. I told him I would be there. Walking back to my side of town, I felt strangely lighter. The hurt from Sophie's words was still there, but it sat beside something new, a sense that I had stepped from the passenger seat of my own life back into the driver's seat. I did not yet know where I was going, but I had my hands on the wheel again. That night, back in my loft, I opened the metal box once more, but only to make sure everything I might need was inside. The list of properties, the summary Harold had given me years ago, a few letters. I did not spread them out on the table. I did not want to get lost in details on my own. I put the box in my bag and set the bag by the door, ready for the morning. Harold's office is in a modest building downtown, not far from where the city's older streets meet the newer glass blocks. I arrived a little early and sat in the waiting area. There were 2 chairs and a low table with magazines. A plant in the corner had grown a little taller since I was last there. His assistant came out with a smile, said it had been a while, and offered me coffee. I accepted. When Harold opened his door, he shook my hand and asked me to come in. His office looked the same as always. Shelves of files, a window with a view of a side street, a desk that held more paper than decoration. On the corner of the desk sat a thick folder with my name on the tab. Seeing my name there, printed in clear letters, gave me a strange feeling. It was like looking at a version of myself that lived only in documents and signatures. He asked me to tell him what had happened in my own words. So I did. I told him about the dinner, about Sophie talking about pressure and costs, about her calling me a burden in front of everyone and telling me to move out that night. I told him about the messages the next day, where she and Graham suggested I sign everything over so they could manage it. Harold listened without interrupting. From time to time he made a small note on a yellow pad. He did not show shock, but I could see in his eyes that he was weighing every detail. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at the folder with my name again. He said that when we first set up the trust and the property company, we had talked about the risk that people might one day see me only as a source of money, not as a person. He reminded me that this was why he had suggested adding certain conditions, especially to the part that named Sophie as the main person to benefit. He said these conditions were written in plain legal language, but the heart of them was simple. If I was openly treated as if I did not matter, or if someone tried to push me aside while still counting on my work, I would have choices. He did not open the folder all the way. He lifted the cover, scanned a page, then set it down again. He did not slide any paper across the desk yet. He said we did not need to rush into anything, but he also said that based on what I had told him, we were no longer talking about small family tension. We were talking about a pattern and about a clear moment where lines had been crossed in front of others. I asked him what options I actually had. He replied that the exact steps would depend on what I decided I wanted. He spoke slowly, choosing his words. He said a trust is a tool, not a trap. It can be adjusted within the rules we set, especially if the reasons for the change match what we wrote years ago. He mentioned that there were ways to change who receives what in the future, to set special care for Eli if I wanted, and to direct more support toward other things that mattered to me. He also brought up the properties. He reminded me that the house Sophie lived in, the building where Graham's firm sat, and the warehouse where the tool library lived were all part of the same small company we had formed. He said I had been very generous with rent discounts, especially for Sophie and for Graham's firm. He said that generosity had been my choice, not an obligation written anywhere. He paused and then said something that stayed with me. He said that legally I was much less trapped than I might feel. The part that was trapped was not my finances, but my habit of always putting myself last in my own decisions. He said that habit was not written in any contract and could change if I decided to change it. We talked about practical things too. He asked if anyone besides Sophie and Graham knew the details of my structure. I said no, only him and me. He asked if I had any record of the dinner or if anyone might have recorded parts of it. I said Daniel sometimes filmed little family moments on his phone and that there were phones on the table. I also said there were several adult witnesses who heard Sophie's words. Harold nodded and made a note. He said we might not even need recordings, but that their possible existence gave extra weight. Before I left, he told me to think about what I wanted my money and my buildings to do in the next 10 or 20 years. Not just who they should go to, but what kind of behavior they should support. He said I should not decide anything just to punish someone, but also not keep everything frozen out of fear of making a hard choice. He asked me to come back after I had thought about it, or to call him sooner if something new happened. From Harold's office, I walked to the bank that handled the trust and the company accounts. I did not plan to make any changes that day. I only wanted to see things with my own eyes, to remind myself that the numbers were real and not just stories on paper. The bank staff recognized me. I had been there many times over the years, signing small things, checking balances. They greeted me by name and led me to a small room with a table. A polite worker brought a thin stack of printed summaries and left me alone to look at them. I did not need to see exact figures to feel the weight. I could see where income came from, rents from tenants I had never met, the discounted payments from Sophie's house, the even lower payments from Graham's firm, the small but steady stream that went to support the tool library's work. Looking at those sheets, I realized that for a long time I had seen the system as something outside of myself, as if it had just grown around me and I was lucky to get shelter from it. But it was not a plant that had grown on its own. It was a structure I had helped build, brick by brick, hour by hour, decision by decision. Every discount, every lenient rule, every quiet donation was my choice. If I could bend it this way, I could also bend it another way. I left the bank without signing anything. I thanked the staff and stepped back out into the street. The city looked the same, but I felt like someone who had finally looked at the map in his own pocket after walking for years by memory alone. That afternoon, I returned to the tool library. Rosa asked how the meeting had gone. I told her that Harold had reminded me I had more choices than I thought. I said no decisions had been made yet, but the ground under my feet felt firmer. She smiled and said that was a good start. We went over some simple paperwork for the library. A local school wanted to send a group of students for a workshop. A neighbor had donated some good quality saws. We planned a basic safety talk. As we worked, I felt again that sense of solid, honest respect in the room. People there did not see me as a burden. They saw me as someone who could help them fix what was broken. It was late in the day when my phone buzzed again. This time it was not a direct message, but a notification from the family group chat. I opened it and saw a bright picture Sophie had sent, a digital invitation for Eli's upcoming birthday party. The design showed balloons and stars and the words, "Eli turns 7," in big letters. The party details were written under the image. It would be held in 2 weeks at an upscale restaurant in the city center on the other side of town. Sophie wrote a cheerful message thanking everyone in advance for coming. She said she was especially grateful to Graham for making this wonderful celebration possible. She added some hearts and a smiling face. Under that, Linda wrote that she could not wait. Several relatives responded with their own short notes. Near the bottom of the thread, I saw a small line where Sophie had tagged me directly. She wrote that she hoped I would come, but asked that I please keep things relaxed and not bring up heavy topics at the party. She wrote that she wanted the day to be about Eli and joy. I stared at that last line for a long moment. It was not cruel on the surface. It even sounded polite. But I knew what sat behind it. She wanted me there as a quiet extra in the room, no trouble, no wait, no reminder of anything uncomfortable. She did not want the man who had been told to leave with a grocery bag to make anyone feel uneasy in the restaurant she had chosen. I closed the chat and opened my phone's calendar. I found the date of the party and tapped it. A blank line appeared for a note. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then I typed 2 words. Final decisions. I set the reminder for a few hours before the party time. I did not yet know exactly what those decisions would look like. I only knew that by the time Eli's birthday came, I would no longer be treating my own life as if it were someone else's project. As I put the phone away, I caught my reflection in the glass pane of the office window. Same face, same lines, same tired eyes. But behind them, something had shifted. I was still quiet. I was still calm. The difference now was that I had stopped telling myself that being calm meant accepting every weight placed on my shoulders. In another part of town, my daughter was planning a celebration in a building she believed she reached through Graham's skill and status. In this part of town, I stood in a space I knew I had helped build from the ground up. The 2 sides of my life were moving toward each other, closer with every small step I took. I woke on the morning I had marked as final decisions, feeling strangely clear. I did not sleep long, but the sleep I got was deep enough. For a moment, I lay still in my loft, watching light creep around the edge of the curtain. I could hear a truck somewhere outside and the faint rattle of pipes in the wall. This was my place, my side of town, my base. That thought steadied me. On the small table near the door sat my old leather bag. Inside it, the metal box waited with its papers and lists. I had carried that box for years, as if it were just weight, something I needed to keep safe but never really open. Today it was no longer just a heavy object. It was a set of tools I had finally decided to use. I washed, dressed in clean clothes, and made simple breakfast. Then I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out the suit I wore only on special days. It was not new, but it was well kept. I shook it out, checked the pockets, and put it on. The jacket felt a little stiff at the shoulders. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror above the sink. Same face, same lines, but the suit made my posture change just a bit. I looked like someone going to a serious meeting, which is what I was. I slid the metal box into the leather bag, checked that my phone and wallet were in place, and locked the loft door behind me. The air outside was cool and bright. The walk to the bus stop felt different in the suit. I saw myself reflected in some windows as I passed. An older man in a dark jacket carrying a worn bag, heading toward the city center with a steady step. At Harold's office, his assistant greeted me by name and led me in. Harold stood up, shook my hand, and said he was glad I had come. On his desk, my folder lay open now, not just with the old papers, but with some fresh ones on top. He did not slide anything toward me right away. He asked if I was sure I wanted to move forward with any changes. I told him I had thought about his words. I said I had spent years treating my own life as if it belonged mostly to other people, as if my only job was to make things easier for them. I said that, after what had happened at Sophie's dinner, and after the messages about handing everything over, I could not continue in that way. I told him I wanted my money and my buildings to support respect, not erase it. Harold listened, then nodded. He said that was the clearest way he had heard anyone put it in a long time. He reminded me again that we should act from that base, not from anger. He said that if my goal was to punish, I might regret the shape of my choices. If my goal was to set fair boundaries, I would be able to live with them later. He went over the options. He did not read the documents word for word. He explained them in plain language. He said we could adjust the trust so that Sophie would still receive something, but not as much control as before. He said we could create a separate part for Eli's future education that only he would benefit from when he was old enough. He said we could direct more support to the tool library and similar projects, in line with what I already spent my time doing. He also spoke about the rental terms. He pointed out that the reduced rent for Sophie's house and for Graham's firm had never been a legal duty, only a favor. He said I could decide whether to end those favors and bring everything back to normal market levels. He said that if I wished, we could also set clear notice periods so that there would be no surprises later and no room for argument. I sat with his words for a few minutes. He did not rush me. He watched my face, not the clock. I thought of Sophie sitting in her spotless dining room, telling me I was a burden. I thought of Rosa standing in the dusty warehouse, treating me as a partner. I thought of Eli, who still saw me as just his grandpa, the one who fixed things and made simple toys from spare parts. In the end, I told Harold that I wanted to go ahead. I said I did not want to throw Sophie out of my life or cut her off completely, but I could not leave everything open for her and for Graham to shape as they liked. I said I wanted the main flow of my work to go towards something that had not turned its back on me. I said I wanted to ensure Eli would be helped without anyone else being able to treat that help as their own power. Harold nodded and took out a few pages. He placed them in front of me one by one, explaining each in a few calm sentences. The pages did not show long blocks of language to the world. They sat between us, quiet and serious. He pointed to the lines where my signature would go. I read enough to feel sure that these pages matched the plan we had described. Then I signed. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Each stroke of my name felt like a line drawn, not just on paper, but across the years behind me. I was not erasing the past, but I was marking where it ended and where a different phase began. After we finished, Harold gathered the papers into a neat stack. He said his office would file everything with the trust managers and the proper offices. He said I would receive copies later. He also handed me 2 sealed envelopes and 1 thin folder. He said the first sealed envelope held a formal notice for Sophie about the change in rent terms on the house. The second was a notice for Graham's firm about the change in office lease conditions and future non-renewal. The thin folder held a short letter written in simple language that I could choose to read aloud or not. It explained in general terms that I had adjusted my plans in response to how I had been treated and what I now valued. He told me I did not need to present any of this in a dramatic way. He said the real power of these papers did not come from how loudly they were shown, but from the quiet fact that they were real, signed, and already in motion. He reminded me that I could choose when and where to mention them, or even not to mention them at all. From Harold's office, I walked again to the bank. This time, I did sign a few things. Instructions linked to what Harold and I had just agreed. The worker behind the desk went through the steps professionally without asking questions about my reasons. To them, I was a client updating his plans. To me, I was someone finally choosing the terms of his own future instead of leaving that choice to those who spoke the loudest. When I stepped back out onto the street, the day had warmed. People hurried past with bags and briefcases. Cars inched through the intersection. Above all that movement, I felt still. Not stuck, but steady. I checked my watch. The meeting with Harold and the visit to the bank had taken most of the morning. In the afternoon, I went back to the tool library. Rosa saw the sealed envelopes and the folder in my bag when I set it down in the office. She raised an eyebrow and asked if things had moved forward. I told her that the papers we had talked about were now signed and underway. I said that nothing would change overnight, but that the path was set. She asked if I felt all right with what I had done. I thought for a moment and told her the truth. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I had finally stepped up for myself. Sadness that it had come to this with my own child. Rosa said that life sometimes pushes people to choose between staying small and being fair to themselves. She said I had chosen the second path, even though it hurt. She added that Eli might not understand now, but one day he might see that his grandfather was not as weak as others made him sound. In the days leading up to the party, I went about my usual routines. I helped fix a fence for a neighbor. I showed a young man how to change a bike chain. I replaced a broken switch at the tool library. Each small task felt more grounded now. I was no longer serving from some hidden place of fear. I was acting as someone who had drawn a quiet line. Sophie did not call me. She sent a few short messages to remind me of the party time and the dress code, as if nothing unusual had happened. She did not mention the dinner again. She did not ask where I was staying. In the family group chat, she shared photos of decorations and little boxes of treats she had ordered. She wrote that she wanted this day to be perfect for Eli. I noticed that every time she praised someone for helping, she mentioned Graham by name. On the morning of the party, I woke early again. The reminder on my phone buzzed at the set time. Final decisions. I smiled a little at the words. The decisions were already made and signed, but this was the day they would step from quiet paperwork into the world where Sophie lived. I dressed in the same suit I had worn to Harold's office. I polished my shoes. I checked the leather bag once more. The 2 sealed envelopes rested inside, along with the thin folder. I held the bag for a moment before closing it, feeling the shape of the edges through the worn leather. Before I left, I looked around my loft. I did not know what my life would look like after this day, but I knew this place would still be here, waiting. It had been built on choices I had made for myself. That gave me courage. The restaurant was in the city center, in a building I knew very well. Years earlier, when the original owner had struggled, I had bought it through the company, fixed what needed fixing, and leased it to the pair who now ran it. They had turned it into a bright, busy place. People came there to celebrate promotions, birthdays, and anniversaries without knowing whose decisions had made the space possible. When I walked through the main doors, the manager saw me and came forward at once. He greeted me with warmth, called me Mr. Reed, and thanked me again for believing in their project when the building still had cracks in the ceiling and old wiring in the walls. He asked if I was there as part of the private event on the second floor. I said I was. As he led me toward the stairs, staff nodded and smiled. To them, I was not a burden. I was the reason they had jobs in that place. That thought settled over me like a calm hand on my shoulder. At the top of the stairs, a hallway led to a set of double doors. Behind those doors, I could already hear voices. The clink of glasses, the high pitch of children's laughter. Music played softly. A member of the event staff stood near a small podium, checking a list of guests. Before I stepped forward, I heard a sound from inside, someone tapping a microphone. The music lowered. A voice, the event host's, carried through the gap between the doors. He said that it was time for the proud mother to say a few words and that everyone should give their attention to Sophie, who wanted to thank the people who had made this day possible. I stood there in the hall, my hand on the strap of my leather bag, listening to the first seconds of applause rising from the room where my daughter believed she knew exactly who held her world together. I waited until the applause died down, then pushed the doors open and stepped into the room. The private hall was bright and full. Balloons lined the walls, and a big banner said, "Eli is 7." There was a long table covered with plates and small sandwiches. At the far end stood a photo board full of pictures of Eli with Sophie, with Linda, with Graham. I saw myself in only one small picture, half cut off at the edge. Sophie stood near the front with a microphone in her hand. She wore a neat dress and a bright smile. Graham stood a little behind her, one hand in his pocket, looking relaxed. Eli sat on a chair near the cake, swinging his feet. Sophie was saying how thankful she was that everyone had come. She thanked the restaurant, saying it was all thanks to Graham's good contacts and sense for quality. She thanked her mother for always being there. Then she turned and called Graham her rock and said he was the one who made big things like this party possible. People clapped. Some looked at me when she said that, some did not. I walked along the side of the room and took a place near the back wall, my leather bag resting against my leg. When the host asked if anyone else wanted to say a few words, I surprised even myself. I raised my hand. The room quieted. Sophie saw me and froze for a moment. Then, with a tight smile, she said into the microphone that her father would like to say something. A few guests shifted in their chairs. Eli brightened and waved at me. I walked to the front with slow, steady steps. My heart beat hard, but my voice felt ready. Sophie handed me the microphone without meeting my eyes. I thanked her and turned first to Eli. I told him I was proud of him, that I still remembered the day I first held him, that he had always been curious and brave. I said this day was for him and that nothing I was about to say would change how much I cared about him. Then I turned to the room. I said that many of them knew me only as Sophie's father, the quiet one in the corner. I said that, in another part of the city, people also knew me as the man who fixed their things and ran a tool library in an old warehouse. I added calmly that through a small company, I also owned a few buildings. A small murmur moved through the crowd. I said that one of those buildings was the house where Sophie lived. Another was the one where Graham's firm kept its office. In the building we were standing in now, this restaurant was part of that group too. I did not raise my voice. I only set the facts down like tools on a bench. I said that after being told at a family dinner that I was a burden and being asked to pack a grocery bag and leave that same night, I had gone to see my lawyer. I said that years ago we had set up a trust and a company with clear rules about how I could respond if I was ever treated as if I did not matter. I opened my bag and took out the thin folder and the 2 sealed envelopes. I did not wave them around. I held them low, at my side. I said that I had used those rules. I had adjusted the trust so that most of what I had built would now support the tool library and other projects, with a separate fund set aside for Eli alone when he was older. I said that Sophie would still receive something, but not what she might have expected before. I nodded to a server I had spoken with at the entrance. He came forward, took the 2 envelopes from my hand, and carried one to Sophie and one to Graham. I said those envelopes held formal notices. One explained that the deep discount on Sophie's house was ending, and that, in time, she would have to pay normal rent or move. The other explained that Graham's firm would no longer have its office lease renewed under the old easy terms. Graham opened his envelope on the spot. His face lost its easy smile. He started to say something, then stopped when he saw the official letterhead. Sophie clutched her envelope in both hands, her eyes wide. She said, "I had no right." I answered that I had every legal right, and that I had used it. I said I would not shout, I would not argue, and I would not stay where I was called a burden. I would simply stop pretending I had no choice. I turned back to Eli. I told him that when he grew up, he should remember this. People who treat you like a weight do not get to decide your worth. You do. Then I handed the microphone back to the host, picked up my leather bag, and walked toward the doors. Behind me, the room had gone almost silent. I heard chairs creak, someone whisper my name, the soft tear of paper as an envelope opened. The doors closed gently at my back, and the sound of their voices faded as I stepped into the quiet hall.